I'm so glad you are able to join tonight. We're going to go ahead and get started. So if we haven't met virtually yet, my name is Beth Hall. I go by Coach Hall Writes on YouTube and TikTok. And one of the things that I do is I make videos and other tutorials and resources to help students prepare for the AP-Lang exam. So the AP-Lang exam is just a couple weeks away. There's still plenty of time to refine skills and to prepare. But what we're going to work on tonight is just some tips about the argument essay. This is more of a workshop. I'm going to kind of take you through a little bit of a lesson and give you some tips along the way. Some of this might be a little bit of a review. You might be like, oh yeah, our teacher already covered this. If so, that is awesome. And just bear with me because I want to make sure that we kind of go through the entire process. So I will drop the link again, but I made a set of slides, a slide deck for everybody in case you want to participate with the lesson itself. I'm going to be asking for people to respond in the chat if they want to, but I also wanted to have something interactive for teachers and students. So if you are a teacher, you're welcome to use these slides in your classroom. It should ask you to make a copy for yourself. That'll put it in your own Google Drive. That way you can type on it and edit as you need to. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to periodically close out of the slides and then check the chat responses. So it's going to be a little bit of in and out just because I can't see the chat at the same time as I'm looking at the slides. So anyway, like I said, my name is Beth Hall. I am Coach Hall Writes on YouTube and TikTok. If you're a student and you're on TikTok, please follow me over there as well. I'm going to be going live a couple times before the exam on TikTok and answering questions over there as well. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing today. We are going to be looking at a prompt that I created for this workshop. I didn't want to use one from the College Board because I figured someone might have already done it in class and then it would be repeat info. So I made my own prompt that's based on how they word things. So we're going to break down that prompt kind of like we would on exam day. We're going to brainstorm and select evidence. We're going to practice a thesis statement, and we're even going to look at least one sample paragraph. At the very end of the session, if you're interested in winning a free 20-minute tutoring session with me on OutSchool, I'll give you a link to do that. Basically what it is it's a Google form, and I'll select a few winners. I'll contact them via email. We'll also have time for a Q&A. So definitely stick around all the way through if you can. All right, so I already put the link for the slides in the chat, but you don't have to download it or like make your own copy, but I thought some people might want that. So one thing I want to know before we start is, what is your biggest struggle with argument essays, or what is your biggest concern about argument essays? So in thinking about the AP-Lang exam coming up and specifically argument, so Q3, what is it that you're most worried about? I had this conversation with my students last week. They told me the hardest thing for them is they worry about the evidence. They worry about coming up with specific evidence. That's their big worry. And so we will talk about that a little bit during our session today. But if you're a student, go ahead and let me know in the chat what your biggest struggle or concern is. And it is okay to admit that you're struggling or that you have a worry about something, because there is time to fix it. And by the way, the AP-Lang exam is not supposed to be easy. So it's okay to admit that it might be a little bit hard. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and just double check the chat to make sure that everything is good. All right, so let me see some of these responses. Trying not to be basic. Yes, that can be really tricky, that specific evidence. And also the commentary can be hard to be in depth. Not enough time. I know, I hear you on that one. I wish they gave you guys a little bit more time. Having bad evidence, coming up with evidence. Let's see, blanking and not knowing like enough evidence. Yeah, I think that like the writer's block side of things can be really difficult on exam day. The key to that though is you have to write something, because your AP reader can't score it if there's nothing on your page. Time, evidence, and time, being specific. Okay, so it sounds like we're all kind of having some of the same concerns about argument, which is good because that hopefully will show you that you're not alone. But also hopefully tonight we can get some tips on some of these issues. Okay, so let me go back to sharing. But thank you all for responding in the chat. That helps me know what to discuss tonight as well. No, wrong link. Let's see, here we go. All right, so it should be sharing on your end again. All right, so we're going to break down the prompt first. Now, some of the stuff that I'm going to do with you tonight, because I'm trying to make it interactive and I also want to show you some of my process, it's going to take a lot longer than you would do it on the exam. So if you're listening to me and you're like, I can't spend this much time doing this on the test. When you do it by yourself, it's faster. Also, fair warning, some of these steps might not work for you the same way they work for everybody else. So on exam day, you got to do what works best for you. But I want to show you how I teach it in my classroom. That way, if anything is new or different, or if it just kind of clicks tonight, that way it could hopefully help you out. So on exam day, there is a really strong chance that you're going to get a prompt that has a quote. I'm pretty sure last year's prompt about the value of striving for perfection, I don't know that it had a quote, but they did tell them, hey, write about this topic. But in the past, they've usually had a quote. Now there's going to be, if there is a quote, just usually one quote. You're not going to have to like compare and contrast two different people's perspectives or anything like that. They used to do prompts like that. They've streamlined it, thankfully. So let's say this was exam day. You would have a quote like this. So this one says, Albert Einstein once said, learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. So then it's going to give you a task. So it's going to tell you something worded similarly to this. Write a well-developed essay that argues your position on the value of curiosity. Okay. So the reason why they give you a quote most of the time is because they want to kind of give you someone's perspective on the issue. Now, you don't actually have to reference, in this case, Albert Einstein, but what they really want you to talk about is the value of curiosity. Now, if you do include the quote in your essay, that's fine, but I kind of think it's a little bit of a waste of time. Don't bother rewriting the entire quote because we know what the prompt was. So if you want to mention Einstein, if that's your writing style, that's cool. But don't waste time copying the quote because what we really care about is your position on the value of curiosity, not what Einstein said. So what I tell my students to do is I tell them to circle or underline the keywords in the prompt. So for this, I would want them to underline the topic. I would want them to underline the value of curiosity. Now, I know it seems kind of simple. You're probably like, well, Coach Hall, I read it. I know what I'm supposed to write about. But I've seen some essays where students thought they were writing about the correct topic, and it was kind of close to what they were supposed to be writing about, but in their head, they kind of got it switched around. So take a second to just like on exam day, underline it, circle it. That way you know what you're talking about. So let's talk about what they actually want you to do. They tell you to argue. They want you to make a defensible claim. They ask you about a position, so that's your stance on the issue. And then the topic itself, that's the value of curiosity. It is okay to use those words in your essay. But sometimes it might feel really repetitive if you keep using the value of curiosity or whatever your topic is. So one activity that I do with my students that we're going to do very briefly tonight is I have them try to think of some other synonyms for the keywords. So if you have a second on your slides, if you're doing it that way, or if you want to put it in the chat, that would be great too. I want you to give me a couple synonyms for the word value. So instead of saying the value of curiosity, what other words could we use for the word value? Let's see if we can come up with maybe 2 to 3 of them in the chat. And it's okay if you put the same answer as somebody else. And I also want you to think of, can we come up with another word besides curiosity? Something that means the same thing, but isn't that word. That way we have another word we could potentially draw from. Okay. And on exam day, you could skip this step because you might be able to come up with these words as you write, but it would just take you like maybe 30 seconds to just put down some bullet points. And for value, if you know synonyms for value because of tonight, then you don't have to write them down. But sometimes it helps to not always say the exact same words in your essay. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second to check the chat. Hopefully we have some good suggestions in there. All right, so I see importance, worth, merit, benefit, strength. Okay, significance. These are all really good words for value. So if you're writing an essay, and I sort of secretly hope that they ask you about the value of something just because, but I almost worry that I'm jinxing it and they're not going to ask you about the value of something just because I said so. but those are all great words that you can use instead. So I would encourage you to put the word value somewhere in your essay, but if you wanted to say importance or strength or worth or merit, those are all some great ones as well. Someone said for curiosity, a synonym would be questioning. That's a great one. And the word questioning is in the prompt too. So that's a way for it to help us. Someone said explore. That's good. And we might actually use that later on too as a possible reason. Open-mindedness. I like that. That's another good one as well. Interest could be, yeah, exactly. Like curiosity could be an interest, and then exploration. Okay, very good. So we have some synonyms now for this topic. Okay, so now let's go to our next step. All right, so I know sometimes students will, when they see a prompt, they'll immediately write a thesis, or they might just jump right into brainstorming evidence. And if that works for you, I'm not telling you to change your process. However, because we're able to go through this more slowly, we're going to try a slightly different approach than what you might be used to. And so instead of jumping into a thesis or evidence right away, I want us to think about the reasons. So the reasons could potentially lead to our main ideas, and it could also help us later on with our commentary. So what I did here is I took the prompt and it said to write about the value of curiosity, and I turned it into a question. And I tell my students to do this for synthesis too. Take the task that they give you that's a statement and turn it into a question. So in the chat or on your slides, I'd like you to tell me, what is the value of curiosity? Determine 2 to 3 reasons why curiosity is valuable. Some of you kind of already gave me some good reasons too. So if you want to put those in the chat again, that is totally fine. But try to think about just in general, like reason why is curiosity valuable? So we don't want evidence right now. I don't want an example of somebody who is curious. I want a reason why curiosity would be beneficial. All right, so I'll leave the slide up for another couple seconds and then I will check the chat. All right, so let's see. Okay, so I see some good answers in here. So someone said it leads to discoveries. Absolutely. Someone said it extends knowledge. That's also very true because it can help get evidence. Yeah, so like scientific research, absolutely. Leads to something new. It could motivate people to further their knowledge. It could make you brave. Okay, that's an interesting perspective. I like that one. Gain wisdom, new experiences. It leads us to make our own decisions. So that's a good one too. Helps you think of new things. It can make you question things, get you out of your comfort zone. Man, you guys are doing a great job with this. Opens up new fields of research. Okay, so we have lots of great answers in here. And if you're following along with your slides and you're like, oh, I like how that person said it, I didn't think of it that way, go ahead and add it to your slide. It's fine. Okay, so what you're doing right now is you are giving me reasons why curiosity is valuable. And so these could potentially become our main ideas later on. And it also, some of you are starting to like to give me a little bit of something that if we push it a little further, could be some commentary. And I know that's something that people were struggling with. So great job with those. All right, so now let me get to the next slide. All right, so here are some that I came up with, and you guys had all these in the chat as well, and some of you had some ideas that I hadn't even thought of, so thank you. Innovation, so basically like inventions, discovery, those two things kind of go together, but I sort of separated them later on when I was like making the slides and coming up with evidence later on, but like you could probably group those together. Progress, and I also said personal growth. And so on the exam, you can write about personal experience. We don't necessarily want your entire essay to be personal experience per se, but it is okay to write about yourself. In fact, some of the like prompts really lend themselves to that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Someone had said like getting out of your comfort zone in the chat. That's kind of like personal growth too. Okay, so you could also kind of flip the question a little bit. You could ask yourself, like, why is curiosity not valuable if you wanted to kind of go against it? I sometimes will have my students think about that, but for the purposes of this activity, I don't know that it's totally necessary. But you could think about that, especially if you wanted to try to set up a counterclaim and rebuttal. Now, just to clarify, because I get this question a lot, and it's a valid question. Do you need a counterclaim and rebuttal? Or do you need to address the counter argument? Technically, no, it is not required. Could it help you earn sophistication? Yes, if done really, really well, but it's not mandatory. And I actually had this conversation with my students today. We were talking about it for synthesis and argument. I told them, if you have a stellar counterclaim and rebuttal, go ahead and include it. But if not, really focus on proving at least two separate main ideas, because I would much rather you prove your argument than have like a so-so counterclaim and rebuttal just because you thought you had to have it. So you might consider the opposite, like why is curiosity not valuable, in case you wanted to do a counter argument. Okay, so we came up with some reasons. Now we need some evidence. And so you can go ahead and respond in the chat. You can also respond in the slides. And if you're doing it on the slides, like I tell my students, just put anything that comes to mind when you're brainstorming, because then what we'll do later is we'll refine it. Sometimes our best ideas come because they're a springboard off of something else. So sometimes we just have to jot down like a couple people's names or different examples, and then we get a really good idea. Our best ideas don't always come to us immediately. So it is okay if you're listing a bunch of stuff, because we're going to kind of narrow it down later. Okay. So I use the acronym CHORES to come up with evidence. I know there are several other acronyms out there. There's ReHugo. I know Tim Freitas from Garden of English. He's a good friend of mine. He uses S-cubed. There's probably like 5 or 6 of them. I've heard of Gopher. They all really get you to the same place, even though they're different letters. So for CHORES, it stands for current events, history, outside knowledge, which is like a catch-all. It could be pop culture, like movies, music. It could be sports, reading, experience, so personal experience, and science. So if you have an acronym that you like and that's how you brainstorm, go for it. On the exam day, you don't necessarily need your acronym, but it really does sometimes help students. Okay. So go ahead and think of some possible examples of different people or situations that demonstrated the value of curiosity. We talked about how it could be valuable for innovation or progress or discovery or growth. So go ahead and give me some examples in the chat. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can read your ideas. All right, somebody said Albert Einstein. That one's actually, I mean, he did say the quote for sure, but if you happen to know a lot about Einstein, I would say go for it. Someone said space exploration. That's good because it's led to the spaceship and the Mars rover. Oh, the Wright brothers. Yes. So someone said the brothers that flew an airplane for the first time. Yes, the Wright brothers. And so they would pair well. You could maybe pair them with like space exploration or something. Someone said Charles Darwin, Isaac Newton, Watson and Crick. Yes, the DNA. I don't know a ton about them, but if you know a lot about them, I think that'd be an interesting example. Someone said curiosity killed the cat. That's the downside to it, I guess. Colonization, yes, because in theory, we could argue that they were curious about like what they would find and like that expansion. So as long as you could prove it and back it up, it works. Genghis Khan. Okay, I'm laughing because I have 2 students in my AP Language class this year, and they have told me that their goal is to write about Genghis Khan on their Q3. I don't know why. It started with a random conversation in class one day and they started researching him. And so I just laugh at that because they wanted to include him on their essays. Marie Curie, yes, I like that one. A little kid putting their hand on a hot burner. Okay, so we might have some personal experience there. Galileo, very good. All right, so now as you're coming up with these examples, oh, someone said personal growth for Helen Keller. That's a good one too. Some of these you might start to notice are like related to each other. Like you might have a couple inventors that you thought of, or a couple personal experiences, or a couple scientists. So we're going to talk in a little bit about how we can pair evidence together to start to strengthen our paragraphs and our arguments. You also, like in the chat, like some of these you might not know as much specifics about, but the idea came to you. So we're going to talk about how we get that specific evidence. Yes, someone said Thomas Edison. He's pretty popular as well I've seen him used on like a few different prompts. Okay, so let's see. let's go to the next slide. Now my slides match yours almost exactly, but like your slides are slightly different, just FYI. But I did try to keep them really close to the same. Okay, so I'm going to show you some of the things that I came up with, and because I wanted to kind of do this activity as well. So for innovation or progress, I came up with Simone Biles because I think that she is a fabulous gymnast. But I was thinking specifically about how she's kind of come up with new moves. And I don't know that it's the strongest example, but she must have been at least somewhat curious about how to do these different moves and what the limitations of her body and her sport were, things like that. I had put Edison in the light bulb and Henry Ford. I crossed those out. And the reason why I did that, and I'm not saying you should, the reason why I did is because if I were writing an essay of those three people that came to mind, I can't tell you much about Henry Ford. It's been a little while since I took an AP history class or American history in general. I could probably say a little bit more about Edison, but all I could really tell you is it took him a bunch of tries to invent a light bulb. That's not going to be specific enough. But Simone Biles, I can tell you a ton of information about her. So the reason why I said, it's okay to have a really long brainstorming list is because sometimes it helps us get to our good ideas. So as you're looking at the different examples that you brainstormed, I want you to start to think, okay, which ones can I actually write about knowledgeably and convincingly? And also, as you're thinking about this, ask yourself, what does this example reveal about curiosity? Because if I had just told you, oh, Simone Biles and curiosity, you might have been like, okay, what? So really make sure that it's something that you can connect to the prompt, that buzzword of curiosity. So I also was doing this just like you guys. I came up with some for discovery. So I put Marie Curie, HeLa cells, and Skloot. So Rebecca Skloot wrote The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which is a book I teach in one of my classes. So I thought there's some different approaches there that I could use for that. And I put down the Mars rover, Jonas Salk, westward expansion, and Columbus. And I crossed some of those out because I don't know a whole lot about the Mars rover, I'm going to be honest. And I did listen to this really good podcast about Jonas Salk and his work with vaccines and stuff, but I forgot most of all the good details. and Columbus, I could tell you a little bit, but not enough that would really be interesting to a reader. So what I'm trying to show you by showing you how I brainstormed and then I prioritized the ones that I knew about best, it was because we wanted to choose that specific evidence. And I rearranged them so that the check marks were at the top, but ordinarily, when I first did it, this list was not in this order because sometimes we have one idea that leads to a better one. And then I talked about some personal growth too. And I thought, well, okay, I had to learn how to throw shot put. I actually threw shot put in high school and college, but prior to that, I played basketball. And I grew up in Connecticut and I was kind of tall at the time, but so I'm not super tall though, but I was for middle school. And so I thought, I should just play basketball. But then I was really curious about track and field and shot put, and I decided that I would I would compete in that instead. So there was a little bit of curiosity there about what does this sport hold for me? I also put learning French and then creative writing, but I crossed those out because I didn't think I could write about it as meaningfully as shot put. And so when we write about personal experience, and this is just a tip for any of the essay prompts for Q3, if you're going to write about personal experience, make sure it's something meaningful. So if you did it one time, or if it really wasn't that important to you, then it might not be the best thing to make it into your essay. Whereas if it was something that truly impacted your life, then it would be something that would come across better, at least in an essay. So those were just some of my ideas. Obviously, you are welcome to have your own evidence. Once we're done brainstorming, we want to consolidate our evidence. We want to kind of choose the ones that we think are best. And that's what I had done there with those little check marks and cross outs. Now, on the exam, this process would go by relatively quickly. And if you know right off the bat, I'm going to write about A, B, C, and D, go for it. But if you're trying to figure out, okay, what is the most convincing argument I can make, it's okay to brainstorm a bunch of stuff and cross it out. So go ahead and look at what you brainstormed, if you're kind of doing this along with me, and select the evidence that you think that you can write about most specifically. So when we say specifics, do you know names? Do you know dates? It doesn't have to be an exact date. Like if you're writing about the Wright brothers, you don't have to tell me the exact date that they flew for the first time, but could you tell me the time period? So we want to try to make sure we know those specifics. We also want to know like what happened, because if I just said, well, Columbus must have been curious because he set sail, he wasn't really trying to discover the US, but he did. That's so vague. Like that's not really specific commentary or a specific evidence. So we want to make sure that we can write about it well. Okay. So the other thing I want you to think about as you're looking at your list and you're kind of crossing off the stuff that you're like, yeah, this doesn't belong in my essay, is do any of your examples pair together? So for instance, in the chat, we saw a lot of inventors or scientists. You might be able to know a little bit about two different people that you could write about well, and you might pair it together. And your main idea might be discovery, and then your evidence might be two separate scientists. Or like as in the case with like my shot put example, I don't really know what I could pair with that. Maybe another personal experience example, but I bet if I had to, I could probably write that paragraph about my curiosity about a new sport. I could probably write just that one example, but develop it well enough that it could stand alone. So that's what I mean by consolidate evidence. So I'll give people a second to do that in case they're following along. All right, so I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and just check the chat to see if there are any questions or if people are putting in. Yeah, someone said the biles. Yeah, that was one of her moves. If people are putting in that. Someone said, would Columbus be pro curiosity or against? That is a great question because I think you could use it either way. So you would have to decide. I think most people would probably use it as pro, but I could definitely see it being used as like the dangers of curiosity because of all the, this is an understatement, but all the trouble he caused. So I think you could use it either way, depending on what you're going for. And someone said I would qualify. So yeah, you could say like in some cases curiosity is good, or in some cases this person's curiosity was good, but in other cases it wasn't. Someone said they actually met Simone Biles. Wow, that's awesome. All right, so it looks like we're all caught up in the chat. So I'm just gonna resume. Okay, so someone had said in the chat, one of the things that they're struggling with is line of reasoning. So a line of reasoning is a logical progression of ideas, and you need a line of reasoning for each of your 3 essays. The problem is that as much as we could tell you as teachers, put your ideas in a logical order, that's not always helpful advice. It's true, but it's not always super helpful. So let's try to figure out what we mean by line of reasoning and some tips to strengthen our line of reasoning. When we think about our line of reasoning, we start with our thesis. What is the overall claim you're trying to prove? We want to consider our main ideas. So the different main ideas of your body paragraphs, because those are supposed to help prove your thesis. Your evidence is supposed to help prove your main ideas, which helps prove your thesis. And your commentary explains your evidence, which helps prove your main ideas and ultimately your thesis. So they're all supposed to build off of each other. One thing you want to think about as you're planning your essay, and I do recommend, regardless of how many steps it takes you to brainstorm and all that, I do recommend for each of your AP Lang essays taking a second to have a plan. And I say this not just as a teacher, but as someone who has personal experience with this. Every year, at least once a year, I do a timed essay with my students. And it's a prompt that I have not taught or done a whole lot of work with. So I try to keep it as close to their experience as I can. And I have found that when I plan my essay in advance, even if it's a really simple outline, my essay is better because I don't get as much writer's block. And if I'm running out of time, I know what main idea I need to tackle next or what point I was supposed to make. I did try one year. I did one essay with an outline and one essay without, and the essay without did not score as well. And I actually gave them to a fellow reader and did not tell the person I wrote them because I wanted to see like, what is it like if I don't plan my essay? It didn't score as well. And the writing experience was not as pleasant because I got halfway through it and I was like, well, let's see what we're doing next for a main idea because I didn't know. I hadn't planned it out. So please plan your essays, even if it's just bullet points. It doesn't need to be detailed because of how little time you have, but have a plan. So one thing to think about is what is the best order of your main ideas? And sometimes the order that we come up with ideas is not always the best order for our essay. So for instance, I had put, when I was brainstorming, I had put innovation first, and then like discovery, and then growth. And so maybe the best order would be discovery, innovation, and growth instead. So we want to consider a couple things here when we're determining the order of our main ideas. Is there a logical progression? That would be one thing to consider. Like, can the ideas build off of each? Something else I would consider, if you're like, they're all kind of equal, especially if you're trying to do 3 body paragraphs, put your weakest idea last, because you might not get to it. And that others might disagree with that strategy. And if you disagree, that's totally fine. But for me, I put personal growth last because of all of them, that was the one where I was like, I don't know if it's going to be as convincing. Could I do it? Yes. But I put growth last because I thought, well, it might be a bit of a stretch, or I might not have enough time. So if you are looking at your main ideas and you're like, like all of these could go in any order, we want to try to have a concrete order. We want to have a reason why we're putting something first, second, or third. And it's okay to do 2 body paragraphs, by the way. So I was kind of thinking of it as maybe discovery could ultimately lead to innovation, perhaps. Something else to think about with your evidence is you might think about the different examples. So I had some examples that were real world examples, and then I had some that were personal experience examples, or at least one. So we want to try to prioritize anything that we could write about specifically, because if it's vague, it doesn't really belong in our essay. But we also might want to try to prioritize real world examples over personal experience in some cases. So I'm not saying don't write about personal experience, but in this case, if I could write about like Simone Biles or Marie Curie or Henrietta Lacks, that would probably be more convincing than Beth Hall's experience with shot put in high school. So sometimes it helps to prioritize those real world examples as long as you can actually write about them. Now, if I had to choose, if I was writing about like my shot put experience and then I had like Henry Ford and Columbus, I really can't write a whole lot about Henry Ford and Columbus because I just am not very knowledgeable about them. So then I would prioritize my shot put example because I at least could write specifically about that. So ask yourself, what is the best order for my paragraphs and my main ideas? Okay, so now we have the idea of a thesis. Now on last year's exam, 97% of students earned the thesis point. Now I want to be clear, just because it's defensible doesn't necessarily mean it is a strong thesis, but you have to have a thesis. You have to have something that you're trying to prove throughout your essay. And we want it to be clear. Sometimes clear for some students is like short and sweet, and that's okay. Other students, it's more nuanced, more involved. We also don't want to list our exact evidence in our thesis. The way I tell my students about it is like, we don't want to spoil your essay. Like, it's okay to tell me your reasons. So I could talk about like discovery and innovation. Like I can say my main ideas, but I don't want to say like Simone Biles, Henrietta Lacks in my thesis because it's a really short essay. So we want to save the exact like evidence for our body paragraphs. And it's okay on exam day to list your main ideas in your thesis. I know some people don't like that approach. It seems a little bit less sophisticated, and they might be right, but we're not trying to earn the sophistication point with our thesis. We're just trying to have a defensible thesis because we need something to build off of. So what I'd like you to try to do, if you're willing, is to write a thesis in the chat. I'll give you a couple minutes to write one, and there's no judgment here. I will give suggestions and feedback if there are some that I like, people that would like comments on it. But I just want to see a defensible thesis statement if you're willing to put it in the chat. So just kind of think of this like a little bit like exam day. There's a tiny bit of pressure, but go ahead and write what you think is a defensible thesis about your position on the value of curiosity. All right, I see one in the chat. Thank you, Karina, for sending one in. And you guys are welcome to use your own ideas too. Like if you had a different main idea that you would much rather write about than something I said, you are more than welcome to use your own. All right, let's see a really great response from Emma and one from Daniela. By the way, if I say your name wrong, I sincerely apologize. All right, I got a few more coming in. All right, so while others might be typing, let's look at some of these. So we have curiosity is valuable because it can be an outlet to new discoveries, innovation, and even personal growth. I like that. So you had used the ones that we talked about. I like the word outlet. I think that is like a nice touch. I like that you said even personal growth, because that kind of tells the person reading it like this one might not be as like not as serious as the others, but this one is, I don't know, like the even personal growth. I like that. Kind of like you're maybe acknowledging that that's like an extra benefit, perhaps. All right, so we have curiosity is a valuable trait because of its role in scientific discoveries and technological innovations. Yes. So that would tell me if I was reading your essay that number one, you think it's valuable, and number two, your body paragraphs are going to be about scientific discoveries and technological innovations. And I think that would be a good pairing because those two ideas go together. So I could see that you would be able to go from scientific discoveries to technological innovations pretty easily. So you'd have a pretty good line of reasoning between those. All right, we have one of the counter argument thesis statements. I like these. Sometimes I think for this prompt it's a little harder, but basically a counter argument thesis is one where you start with like although, and you acknowledge the opposite side, and then you assert your position. So we have, although curiosity can lead to dangerous results, very true, it ultimately results in new discoveries, growth, and innovation. Therefore, there is a large amount of value in curiosity. I like that. I like that you also included the therefore sentence because that really solidifies your position. So sometimes people will ask me like, is the therefore sentence necessary? Not necessarily, but I feel like it's a nice touch because it, beyond a shadow of a doubt, says, okay, this is what I'm going to be arguing. All right, so we have several more that are really great here in the chat. So teachers, if you're watching and you have the time or energy, if you want to go through and kind of give like, you know, hearts or thumbs up or feedback to students who have written some, that would be great. Or if you're a student and you're like, hey, I like this person's thesis, go ahead and share the love, I guess, a little bit as well. So we want to try to make sure we're being really clear about what we're arguing. And as I'm scrolling through these, I think people are doing so. So we have lots of really great options here. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through and read them all, but just scanning them, they look good. So thank you for your participation in that. All right, so because we're almost at time for question and answer. So I'm going to go back to sharing so that we can talk about some other tips. All right, so we talked about a defensible thesis. I want to show you a quick sample paragraph. It was a little bit tricky to get it to all fit on one slide. So I hope that it's clear enough when I go to that slide. But I want you to be thinking about some things. Is the topic sentence effective? So when you write an essay, you're going to want to have the main idea or the claim in your topic sentence, because the thesis statement is kind of like the promise to the reader about what your essay is going to be about. The topic sentence is kind of like the promise to the person reading your paper. Here's what this paragraph is going to be about. Is the evidence specific? So does the person provide enough background information and detail to build that credibility? Because if it's vague, then we lose a little bit of trust in the writer and we might not be as convinced by the argument. Does the commentary explain how the evidence proves the thesis? So that's one of the definitions of commentary. It's kind of like explaining how the evidence relates back to your thesis. Are there effective transitions? So this is going to be one paragraph that I'll show you, but we want to have transitions within our paragraph and also between our paragraphs. And you can use relatively simple transition words or phrases and still have a strong impact. So you could use words like therefore, furthermore, however, moreover, any of those types of words, and there's a whole list of them, and that can help. If you're trying to show a relationship like sequentially, you might say like subsequently or consequently or something like that. So there's a whole list of transition words that you can use. You just want to make sure that you actually know what it means. Is there more commentary than evidence? This is something that I have my students look for. I'll have them highlight their evidence in one color, and then I'll have them highlight their commentary in another color. And part of the reason why is because when we're looking at your essays for AP Lang, and this goes for all 3 essays, we want to see your analysis, your insight. So if you have too much evidence and not enough commentary, then you haven't really completed the task the way that we want you to earn a higher score. We want to see your own analysis and insight. So it's important to try to have more commentary than evidence. And then, is there a concluding sentence that ties back to the main idea or the thesis? I really like concluding sentences because I have read so many essays where the student had a relatively good paragraph. However, at the end, it just kind of stopped. And honestly, it was like, okay, wait a minute, what were they talking about? What was their main idea? So take that the extra second to tie back to your main idea. It might feel really formulaic, and it might be, but it does kind of help, especially when readers are reading hundreds of essays a day. They give each essay its own individual attention for sure, but you want to make sure that you're not having any doubt in their mind whether or not you wrote a strong essay. All right, so let me show you this paragraph. I apologize if the color coding is a little bit tricky to read, but I was trying in this one to show the difference between the evidence and commentary. And when I have my students highlight, I don't necessarily have it be like perfect or exact, but so if you're like looking at this and you're like, oh, I wouldn't have highlighted that in that color, that's okay. But it says, while it is true that some discoveries happen by accident, many prominent discoveries that generated meaningful change and progress have been the result of intellectual inquiry. Okay, so inquiry here is another synonym for curiosity, or it could be. So looking at this topic sentence, I would expect that this paragraph is going to be about discoveries because that's what the topic sentence suggests. So then we have our first bit of evidence. Marie Curie's experiments, for example, led to the discovery of radium and plutonium. I hope that's right. I think it is. I did fact check it at one point, but that was a few days ago. Thanks to her curiosity, Curie's research not only yielded important advancements in cancer research, but also debunked previous theories about physics and chemistry. So this is my evidence. This is kind of me saying, here's a person who exhibited curiosity. Here's what she did. Now I need some commentary about it. As a result, this new information shaped current theories. Because of Curie's curiosity, her groundbreaking research fueled cancer research that has arguably helped save thousands of lives and advance modern science. So I have to ask myself, okay, I know that she had curiosity. It led to her to discover some elements. It led her to discover new techniques. Why does this matter? So if you're one of the people at the beginning who said, I struggle with commentary, ask yourself, why does this matter? Like, so what? So what? She discovered radium and plutonium. So what? Well, because of that, it's actually helped future scientists come up with research that has helped save people, and it's led to advancements. So we want to ask ourselves, like, what does this example reveal about curiosity? Okay. Then we have a transition word. So similarly, the research conducted on cells obtained from Henrietta Lacks in the 1950s, now commonly known as HeLa cells, have led to unprecedented scientific advancements. So it's okay to use time periods. And if you're not sure, but you're close, it's okay. We don't fact check you on the exam, but that does not mean that you should make up facts or statistics. Because if I see something in a student's essay where it's like 9 out of 10 scientists said this, I'm automatically going to be like, I don't know that I believe you. But it's okay if you're like, I can't remember the exact year. It's okay to give us a ballpark time period. Okay, so the realization that HeLa cells continue to multiply even outside of a living host sparked scientific curiosity. So again, there's that word there because I really want it to be obvious that I'm addressing the prompt. While one cannot deny that some of those involved in this discovery, so again, my main idea, exhibited some greed and unethical practices by not fully informing Henrietta Lacks or her family about the procedure or the significance of her cells. The curiosity behind the discovery itself demonstrates the value of such questioning. So one of the tips that I give in a lot of my YouTube videos about commentary is to use words like illustrates, highlights, demonstrates, tell us like why it matters. So it shows us the value of questioning. But I can't just stop there, because that's kind of like me using the prompt, like, oh, what's the value of curiosity? So this is helpful, but this isn't really actually analyzing much yet. So I need to keep going. Asking what else can these cells do led scientists to create specialized treatments, vaccines, and more. So now we're starting to see the benefits of it. Because they were curious, we now have advancements. And this pairs well together with Marie Curie, because thanks to her curiosity, we also have more advancements. Therefore, so we have another transition word. When considering the value of curiosity, especially in the realm of science, so like a little nod there to the fact that I gave 2 scientific examples, one cannot ignore that curiosity contributes to important advancements that not only make proper medical care more accessible, but also improve people's quality of life. Without such curiosity, scientific discoveries and advancements would indubitably, oh, that's the wrong lesson, I think, lessen or cease altogether. Oh, well. So anyway, the idea here, this last sentence, or really the last 2 sentences, the therefore, are trying to wrap up the paragraph and remind the person reading my paragraph here, hey, I'm talking about the value of curiosity, in particular, scientific discovery. So if you're struggling with commentary, just keep asking yourself why. So why does it matter that people were curious about Henrietta Lacks's cells? Well, because of the research they did, it led to advancements, including vaccines. I could have gone into more detail, but again, these things are timed. But they actually use her cells in different labs across the country. So that's the value of it. And had they not been so curious, they might not have made that discovery, or it might have been a prolonged discovery. So there's value in that curiosity. It's helped people have better medical care because of these discoveries and advancements. And in some sense, it's made it more accessible. So anyway, that is a sample paragraph. I'm not saying if this was part of an essay, it would earn a 6 or anything like that. I was just trying to show you some of the skills here. Now, this is the same paragraph, but instead of color coding it with evidence and commentary, I wanted to show you some of the transition words, because I think sometimes students think they only need 1 per paragraph, and there's different ways to lead in. We want to make sure that our sentences are varying lengths. We don't want a bunch of short, choppy sentences. So adding in things like thanks to her curiosity, or as a result, or because of her curiosity, those phrases help us kind of break up the essay and make it flow a little better. And it also helps us remind ourselves and the person who's reading it, here's what I'm arguing about. I'm talking about the value of curiosity in relation to discovery. All right, so hopefully seeing a paragraph and kind of having that was helpful. So I'm going to give you a quick bonus tip, and then we'll move on to our Q&A session. And I'm willing to stay a little extra if there's a lot of questions. When you're creating your topic sentences, going back to this idea of line of reasoning, we want to try to avoid topic sentences that say something like this. One reason curiosity is valuable is. Now, if you've ever written a sentence similar to that as a topic sentence, don't feel bad. It happens all the time. But there are usually better ways to say it. And especially if you're doing it in your second body paragraph and you're like, another reason curiosity is valuable is, we can create a stronger line of reasoning there. So these are actually bullet points, but the bullet points didn't show up very well. These are some sentence frames that might help you transition from one body paragraph to the next, which is why we were trying to think about the order of our body paragraphs. So you could say something like, having already considered that, and the word that's kind of optional. And you put main idea 1, so whatever your reason was. One must also consider that, and then you would introduce your new idea. So your topic sentences for your second body paragraph and your third, if you're doing 3, we want them to kind of be like a bridge between your 2 paragraphs. We don't want it to be really abrupt, like this paragraph ends and now this one begins. We want to guide the reader from one paragraph to the next. So these sentence frames help do that. So in addition to main idea 1, main idea 2 also demonstrates, and then topic in this case could be like the value of curiosity because, or here, the third one, the value of curiosity is not just limited to, and like main idea 1. So like, it's not just limited to scientific discovery. If I was using that previous paragraph, it is also prevalent in, and we could say like inventions or personal experiences or like whatever. Someone said technological advancements in the chat. That would be a great one to include. So these are some sentence frames that you can like literally just plug in your own topic for your prompt, your own main ideas, and hopefully it helps create that line of reasoning. Okay, so I will put this link in the chat if people want it. I just want to give you like a 30-second spiel about the tutoring sessions, and then I'll answer any questions you have. I would like to thank you for giving up a portion of your evening to attend this session. And so if you're a student and you would like to be entered to win a free tutoring session on OutSchool, which is a learning platform, there's a Google form. I'll go through, I'll select a few winners. I'll send them an email about how to proceed with that. If you are not interested at all, you do not need to fill out the Google form. I will take no offense. All right, so I will put that in the chat in just a second in case you weren't able to copy it down, or if you just want to click it yourself. I promise I'll put it in the chat. So what questions do you have? How can I help you? These questions can be anything about argument essays, or if you have a question about the AP Lang exam that's been on your mind and you really want an answer for it, let me know by typing those questions in the chat and I will answer as many as I can. So let me get that link for everybody if you wanted to enter. All right, so the link is in the chat. It should bring you to a Google form for that. All right, so let's see some of these questions. All right, so someone said, is this the intro of the first body paragraph? Oh, this would have been a body paragraph. Thank you, Paula, for clarifying that. What should we do if we cannot think of enough topics? The topic sentence of this body paragraph sounds like it would be the topic sentence of my whole essay. Okay, so you want to have at least 2 topics, like 2 different topics, because you want to have 2 different main ideas. So even if they're like somewhat similar, we want to have 2 distinct main ideas. So you could do like scientific discovery and technological advancements. Those might go together, but if you could come up with separate examples, then you have 2 separate main ideas. Or it could have been like scientific advancements and personal growth. So we want to have 2 distinct main ideas. Some people do 3. 2 is fine. Just develop your paragraphs. And so with that, we want to then ask ourselves, okay, which 1 or 2 examples can I use to prove this main idea? I have a lot of students who tend to write the, like, kind of like I showed you where there's 2 examples. Maybe it's just the way I teach it. I don't know, but they tend to pair their evidence. But there have been times where they're like, hey, is it okay if I just write about like 1 big example and not 2 together? Because it would just sound better. And that's totally fine. It really just kind of depends on what you're using. And that topic sentence for that paragraph might have been like a little bit more advanced, but we just want to be clear on what your main idea is for that paragraph. What are you trying to prove? What should we do if we cannot think of enough topics? So someone said AP Lang is elegant nonsense and APUSH is chaotic nonsense. I could see that. AP Bio, yeah. Okay, so what should we do if we can't think of enough topics? So we answered that one. Tips to increase speed. So I'm assuming you might mean like writing speed, like how quickly you're writing your essays. Here are some general things that can save you some time, especially on exam day. Number 1, you do not need a long intro. So I have seen essays score a 4 out of 6 or higher with just a thesis statement intro. I tell my students aim for, obviously you need at least 1 sentence, but like 1 to 3 sentences. Most of my students do 2 to 3. So if you want to lead into your topic and then have your thesis, you can. The students who write like a whole half-page introduction, they often run out of time for their body paragraphs. And I've had my own students who have done this. I've told them, hey, like, this whole half paragraph intro that you wrote only earned you the thesis point, and really you could have just written this 1 sentence and still gotten that point. So in some sense, because it's a timed essay, you have to work smarter, not harder. So one way to save time is to do a shorter intro that has maybe a couple sentences plus a thesis. Worst case scenario, just a thesis. And if you're really worried about that, you can like skip a couple lines and write your thesis. And if you want to go back to it afterwards and like kind of fluff it out a little bit, you can. Another way to save time is understand that you do not technically need a conclusion for any of your essays. Can it be helpful? Yes. Some students use it to try to earn that sophistication point because they have deeper insight in their conclusion and they situate the issue in a broader context. But if you're worried about your body paragraphs, if you ever have to choose between finishing a body paragraph or writing a conclusion, always choose the body paragraph, because 2/3 of your score, possible 4 out of 6 points, are going to come from your evidence and commentary. So your body paragraphs are the most important. Another way to save time, we kind of already talked about it, but if you have an outline, that can help you stay on task. And honestly, writing faster, like literally physically writing faster, helps. So we do want it to be legible. So, but if your handwriting is not your neatest print or cursive ever, we can still read it. So if you literally need to pick up the pace a little bit, that's okay too. You can tell in students' test booklets sometimes, like if you like look at their first essay and then their last essay, you can tell that their hands gotten tired or they started writing faster because of that. Do you have any tips for testing anxiety? That's a great question. It really kind of depends on what works for you. Positive self-talk. So don't be your own like defeatist or like worst enemy. Because if you go into it saying, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, that's what you're going to linger on. So give yourself a pep talk. And I would say also just kind of like breathe, stick to what you know and what you're supposed to do. But yeah, if you're worried about the anxiety, I would say maybe just like practice in advance some timed essays, but really just reassure yourself that you've got this. And if it's hard, if the test is hard, know that it's hard for almost everybody else too. And they take the difficulty into consideration. So I've had students walk out of the exam and be like, I bombed that. And then they ended up making a qualifying score. So do not assume that you've failed it because you don't know. There's so many factors that could happen and there's different components of the exam. So don't defeat yourself before you start. Do you recommend building upon each piece of evidence by referencing older pieces of evidence? You can. I don't know that you need to do it every single time, but if I am understanding the question correctly, should you refer back to the previous ones? It can help your line of reasoning. There's one essay sample that comes to mind for this. It's the Exploring the Unknown prompt. It's the ones that were rescored with a 6-point rubric. There's one on that got either like a 5 or a 6, and they had a sort of a formulaic, but sort of an interesting line of reasoning by referencing, like one of the paragraphs was about like space discovery and scientific discovery. And then they went into music, and that was the unknown. And so they had sentences that said things like scientists, musicians also do this, and it kind of connected their ideas. So if you can do it in a way that's not obnoxious, then go for it, because it could help your line of reasoning. Do you think putting a counter argument, if we choose to include one, is beneficial as the first paragraph? That really depends on how much time you have, because I could see the argument for address it and then like get it out of the way and kind of do your own points. My only concern would be if you didn't have enough time, then it would almost look like you're contradicting yourself. So that's why some students save it for body paragraph 3, because they know that if they don't get to it, they could scrap it. But there have been essays that I personally have written where I wanted to put it as the first body paragraph. So I would say it could work, but make sure you have enough time to get to your other points. That way it doesn't look like you're somehow contradicting yourself. Oh, someone said this one's about the synthesis. That's fine. What tip would you give someone if they wanted to improve their commentary from a 3 to a 4? This kind of goes for all essays, but like if you look at the wording of the rubric, the thing that they want for a 4 in row B, evidence and commentary, is consistency. So you have to have specific evidence and developed commentary that proves all claims. So sometimes essays that score a 3 out of 4 in any of the prompts, they do so because one body paragraph is stronger than the other, or like they had a claim somewhere in there that they didn't fully prove. That's usually the reason. So it's just that consistency is usually a big thing. And I know that can be really frustrating, because I've read some essays that got a 4 out of 6 that were good essays. Like a 4 out of 6 is good, guys, especially for a timed essay. But I know we want to try to get as many points as possible. Is there a good way to make sure I'm adding value to my argument and not just restating my evidence? Yes. So Include the word because if you can, or something that tells the reasons, the why. So ask yourself why, or so what. Why does this matter? With synthesis and argument too, you want to think about like the big picture. So think about like the actual, if you're doing like the value of something, the actual benefits. Like, why does this matter to society? So with that paragraph I showed you, it wasn't a perfect paragraph, but in that there was at least an attempt to be like, this mattered because it led to these medical advancements. And then we took it a step further. These medical advancements matter because it helps people's quality of life. I think the issue that a lot of students have is they do like one why or one because, and they really should do two. And I try to demonstrate this in my class when I'm asking students a question and they'll answer me and I'll follow back with, okay, cool. So why? So it's like almost like a double why or a double because. Like, keep asking yourself, why does this matter? It matters because of this. Write it down. Okay, why does this matter? And that way you're actually pushing it further than just summarizing the evidence. Do you have a quick way to outline for argument? I might do my 3 reasons. So like for this one, I might put like discovery, innovation, personal growth, and then I would like either across or down, however you want to do it, but like put bullet points underneath it, like Simone Biles for this one, a shot put for this one, whatever they were. I literally do bullet points. And then the other thing though that I will say is if you have an idea of your commentary, write yourself a note, because so many times when I've taken standardized tests, I've had like a thought of, oh yeah, I'm going to include that in my essay. And then when I get to it, I'm like, what was that thought? Always write it down, because then you at least have something to go back to. So if you're like, yeah, I want, like I put in like Simone Biles and I put in parentheses like new moves, that's the reminder to myself, hey, you're focusing on the moves that she created and the curiosity about how she could push her body. So if you have a thought that you like really want to make sure it gets in there, write it down in your outline or like somewhere on your paper. That way you don't forget it, because under pressure, you're not going to remember. So should we have 2 minor examples for each main idea? You can. That's kind of like the approach that I showed with that one paragraph. Or you could have like one really major concrete example. So for the exploring the unknown prompt, there was one essay that it started out with a personal experience example of a student who discovered their love of like climbing and ropes courses because of exploring the unknown. They didn't want to initially, but then they did. And the whole paragraph was about exploring the unknown and ropes courses. And had they done like that, and then like it was smaller, and then coupled it with something else that they tried that was new, I don't think the paragraph would have been as effective. So you have to ask yourself, do I have enough to say about this where it can stand alone, or does it pair better with another example? I maybe could have written more about Gila, especially if I started talking about the author's curiosity and what prompted her to write, but I couldn't have said enough about Marie Curie to write a strong paragraph. So that's why I paired them together. So that's kind of like a judgment call on your part. How do you qualify without straying too far? So you want to set parameters. So ask yourself like, okay, in these situations, curiosity is valuable. In these situations, it's not. And kind of like figure out where you're drawing that line or setting those parameters. So that way you have a clear claim that you're still trying to prove. You don't want to argue both sides. They call it equivocation. So you don't want to have like one paragraph about the values of it and one about the challenges. You can still qualify, but you want to make sure that one side kind of wins out, so to speak, or like you want to make sure that like whatever you're arguing is still really clear. So if you're worried about it, you don't necessarily have to try to qualify. I know a lot of students want to because they think it's a nuanced argument, and can you? Absolutely, but you don't have to. I do have a video about, I think it's called like how to write an effective claim, and it talks about qualifying a little bit or like setting parameters. So that might be helpful. What should I do if I have a mental block? I'm not knowing what to write next. Okay, that's a great question. Take a second to try to recuperate and like recollect your thoughts, but just try for something. Because honestly, if you have nothing on the page, we can't score it. Like obviously you might like be talking about, what if I'm at body paragraph 2 and I can't think? Give us something, but it's okay to take a minute to like collect your thoughts, but you don't want to spend too long on it. So even if you're like, I have this example and I know it's not really strong, but it's the only thing I can come up with, I would rather you write about that example as best you can, even though you're not super confident in it, than to not write anything at all, because it's timed. Let's see. So what is one thing you can't stress enough to not write in your essay? Oh gosh, be careful with religion and politics. Not saying don't write about it. Just remember that you don't know who's reading your essay. So be careful with how you're phrasing things. It is okay to take a stance on something, but sometimes with topics that we're really passionate about in that way, we might present like a bias or something. I would also say, in general, avoid absolutes. So we don't want to say always or never if we can avoid it, because honestly, if I see a sentence that says, oh, curiosity is always valuable, but then I can think of one counter example where it's not valuable, then you kind of lose a little bit of credibility with your reader. So avoid absolutes and just be mindful of how you're presenting your information, I guess. So, and for that, like, you can say like the phrase, something to this effect of like, let's assume for the sake of argument, or something like that. So you can kind of like let them know. The other thing, like, so I was talking to my students about this. They wrote a prompt, it was about a week or two ago. And like, for some reason, like I let them work together to come up with their evidence. And so this one group, like the only thing they could come up with were they paired Rapunzel from Tangled with Moana. And like, they were like, Coach Hall, we didn't know what to write about, so we wrote about Disney. And it was convincing. Like, they still answered the prompt, but it was exploring the unknown. And they were talking about how both of these characters left their home. And I was like, I knew one of the students, we'll call her Becca. And I was like, Becca, your older sibling went away for college. Like, they left home. And she's like, yeah. I'm like, kind of like Moana left home. And she's like, oh, shoot, I could have written about my older sibling. So they went for Disney because that was like the first thing that came to mind, and they didn't know what else to write about. So I told them, when in doubt, just go with it. But if they had stopped and thought, okay, what is this Disney story representing? And they could have talked about going away to college. They could have talked about like immigrating to a new country or moving to a new state or something. Experiences that some of them legitimately had, but they had like totally forgotten about. So I told them I might make a video, not about them, but about like how to write about Disney, so to speak, because they're like, we couldn't think of anything besides Moana. How do you get past writer's block in a time crunch? I wish I had a concrete answer for that. If you're stuck, jot down whatever ideas are coming to mind, if there are any, or honestly, it kind of depends on what point you are in the test. But if this is somehow not if it's not your last essay, like if you still have another essay to go, you can move freely among your FRQs. So what I mean by that is you have 2 hours and 15 minutes to answer all 3 questions. So and this applies not just to argument, but to the others. If you're stuck and you're like, I cannot think of anything, don't waste time. Weigh your options. Consider maybe moving on to the next essay. Leave yourself a page or two just in case you need to go back and write more. But the idea would be maybe you could come back to it, because I've seen incomplete essays that were well written still score well. So if you've got a good start, but you're stuck, maybe your brain needs to just switch to something else, and then you'll come back to a good idea. So basically what I'm saying is do what you need to do to be productive, I guess. I wish I had better advice than that, though. The best way to prepare for philosophical types. That's a good question. I think honestly, the best thing you can do to prepare for Q3 in general is to just make sure you have specific knowledge about a select range of topics. So if you're trying to prepare over the next couple of weeks, stay up to date on current events. And it doesn't mean all current events, but choose a couple news stories that are of interest, or listen to a podcast or a TED Talk about a topic of interest. If you are in AP Bio or APUSH, by studying for those exams, you're helping your Q3 knowledge. So I think just in general, making sure that you have different like tools in your tool belt, so to speak, as far as like evidence, that's the best way to potentially prepare for whatever they throw at you. I say this, and at our last study session, I gave my students a prompt from AP Classroom about, there were 2 prompts. So some of them had a prompt about cell phones, and the other had a prompt about photography. And they were like, what is this? This is nothing like what we've done in class. And I was like, but it's an argument. And so they had to stop and think like, okay, for cell phones, like what evidence do I have about this prompt? And for photography, like what do I know? And so some of them talked about photoshopping and filters, and they made an argument. So as much as I like to tell students, like try to make sure you're well-rounded, sometimes it comes down to basic everyday knowledge, and that's okay. I mean, heck, you could write about Rapunzel and Moana. How do we grow our knowledge of things we can use as evidence? So be specific, like as in don't try to learn everything about everything. So I have I have an assignment that I give my students. It's called a Q3 database, and I've tweaked it every year. So this year I had them come up with like 3 to 5 people that they could write about well. And it's okay for them to use stuff like that they've used in other essays before. 3 to 5 historical events that they could write about well. 3 to 5 instances of pop culture. Like if you're paying attention to like the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard thing going on right now, and somehow that fits the prompt and you could speak about it knowledgeably, okay. So choose like 3 people, 3 events like that well, and study those. Because if you spread yourself too thin, you're not going to remember anything. So become an expert on a few things. And if it doesn't help you, chances are there's something else that you have had knowledge of in the past that will. Okay, so I think that was like all the questions for now. So if you guys continue to have questions, please follow on TikTok. I try to not only respond in the comments, but I will make video responses for people. For some of them, if it's something I can't write because they limit your characters, which is really frustrating. So when you are studying, just remember I have a whole database on YouTube. There's different playlists. I've got a lot of TikTok content as well. You can also reach out on Instagram if you have a question instead of TikTok if you want to, and I'll try my best to help you. But anyway, thank you so much for coming tonight and virtually learning with me. I hope it was valuable. I hope you had your questions answered, but you guys had some great ideas in the chat. So anyway, have a really great night and feel free to reach out if you need more help over the next 2 weeks. Thank you.